Okay, so we'll crack on. We've got four people. We had 12 signed up, but often, this is our second webinar. So the last one, I think we had about a 70% of the people actually managed to get there for different reasons. Obviously, people are busy, but we'll crack on anyway. So this today we're just going to be talking about tech and equipment that we use, that I use, that horsemen use. So along the way, if there's any questions that you've got, please feel free just to pop in and ask any questions that you may have about the subject. But I'm just going to crack on, and a couple of things I wanted to talk about with the halter. So the halter was, I just did a bit of research on halters and when they were developed. So the first halter was patented in 1894 in the States by a chap called Henry Wagner. So they've been around a really long time. Obviously, on the steppes of Mongolia, they had their halters, but the first known people to put a word to the halter were the French, as far as I know, licoil, which means link, collar link. And that first came up in 1333, so that takes it even further back. But I'm sure way back in time, people were using halters and obviously bits and bridles and that sort of thing. So that's just a little bit of history on halters. The reason why I use a rope halter, mainly because I can adjust it to fit the horse properly. I see a lot of halters out there that people are buying from the internet that are often too big for the horse. And one of the problems that we have is when you're working, sending the horse around you, for example, the halter sort of slips around the face, and the piece of rope that comes down the side of the face often ends up in the eye. So I like to just put the halter on nicely, though. I've got sort of two fingers under the chin and then two fingers down further on the nose. So there's a little bit of room so that the horse can also open its mouth, which brings me to another point with going bitless and with halters. Normally I have a horse with me, so it's a lot easier for me to talk about these things. So without my horse, I struggled a little bit last time, but I'm getting better at it. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with the halters and the bitless bridles was, and I've probably said this to you guys before, but quite a few people are finding aren't aware that horses don't breathe through their mouth. They can only breathe through their nose, but they use their mouth to balance out their respiratory system. So often having a bit in the mouth can mess with the respiratory system, with the balance of the respiratory system. So I always find it fascinating that there's quite a few people that I've spoken to that don't actually know that. So you have a soft palate at the back of the mouth which shuts off the airway, but the horse needs to open its mouth and close its mouth just to balance out the respiratory system. And often with bits in the mouth, they struggle to balance out the respiratory system. So that's some interesting information there. I have got some questions which a couple of people posted through to me before the webinar. So I'm just gonna go over a couple of those. One was I see a lot of people leave their halters on their horses in the paddock, and I've seen not so long ago I saw a horse that got caught up in its halter out in the paddock. It tried to scratch its chin with its back leg and caught the hoof with a shoe on it in the halter, and obviously went down and got stuck and cast and couldn't get up and caused itself quite a lot of damage and pulled quite a lot of ligaments. So I often recommend to people not to leave the halter on. I think a lot of people leave the halter on because they struggle to catch their horse. But my recommendation is not to leave a halter on your horse, especially if you're putting out a paddock. Obviously, you're going to get caught on other things too. So I don't recommend keeping a halter on your horse. Is there any questions? I'll be quick. If there is a question, we'll answer it. But if there isn't, then I'll move on quite swiftly. Anyone got any questions around the halters and how to put the halter, how to adjust the halter? Because you may have a halter that you may be a little bit too big or too small. So adjusting your halter, I often do that for people because using the Theodore notch at the bottom of the halter, but it's quite tricky to do. So if you did ever want to adjust your halter, let me know, and I can talk you through that or help you with that. Hi, Joe.
Hey, yeah, I was just wondering, my halter angel today is a little bit small in the sense I think it's shrunk over the years. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem to fit under her jaw like it should do.
Yeah.
The throat area.
Yeah. So what I do with under the throat latch area is that I just take two fingers, parallel two fingers, my two index and the next one, and just put it under the chin and make sure there's enough of a gap, two finger gap under the chin, and then also down by the nose, so the horse can still move its jaw and open its mouth. So if you check that with your fingers, just put them in there and make sure there's enough room. If it's more than two fingers, normally what happens is when you're working, especially when you're sending around in a circle, you see the halter will slip around and the cheek piece will start to come up towards the eye. So if that's happening, then you know your halter is too big. If it's too small, then the horse won't be able to open up its mouth and balance out its respiratory system. So make enough room so it can open its mouth. Also for, licking and chewing and relaxation, making sure that it can still open its mouth. Often what happens with a bit, we put the horse is avoiding a bit, we put a nose band or a cavesson drop nose band on our horses and tie the mouth down. And that often has detrimental effect on the horse, physically and, it struggles with that.
Thank you.
No worries.
I'll double check when I see her again.
Okay. Yep. Good. So, another question that I had come in, about the bitless bridles, was, someone that hasn't done bitless before. How do horses generally respond with bitless? So in my experience, going from bit to bitless, obviously there's a learning period, and then a training period to go bitless, and that depends on the horse and the amount of time we need to spend with it. But often, mostly, I find that the horses respond really well to bitless. But it's putting in the time and the preparation to go bitless to make sure that you can flex and bend and get your horse following your hand and your lead with your hand. And that takes, that can take, who knows how long it will take, but with the right training and the right input, that can quickly turn around. Often I find the horses are way more relaxed when they're bitless. Often people are really afraid to go bitless. The security of having the bit in the mouth is a big one. So it's letting go of that and just going into the training process and getting that horse bitless. Often we just start off in a halter, which some of us are doing. Joan and I did that today. We rode in the school, and then we went for a little outride out in the field, just in our halter. So you can use the halter to start the training process to go bitless. So that's just a question that someone pop through to us. Is there any questions around that from anybody? No questions? Okay, we'll move on swiftly. I won't spend too long with that. Another question that came through today was, why do we use a 14-foot and a 22-foot rope, and what are the applications for that, and where do we use those? So to start with, we start training with a 14-foot rope, so the horse is a little closer to it, and we can work through our walk and trot transitions on the 14-foot line. I like to use a 14-foot line. Some people use a 10-foot, some people use a 12-foot, some people use a 14-foot. I prefer the 14-foot because it gives me more breadth on my triangle when I'm sending my horse around me. So I've got enough in my hands to have a nice distance between myself and the horse, but I can also use my rope. And I often say to people that the horse is long, we're tall, so just spreading out your hands and setting up a triangle is enough rope to do that, and then you can use your tail for motivation. So you all know this because I've worked with all of you about direction, intention, and then motivation. So 14-foot rope gives me enough length in my rope to do that sort of thing. And then once I've perfected my walk and trot then I'll go to a 22-foot line so I can build my communication from further away, but also to work on my canter transition. So to start with, I won't do a canter transition on a shorter line. I'll go to my longer line. And once I've perfected that, horse is calm, head down, and going through those transitions, then I'll go to my 22-foot line, which I use largely for the canter work. So I'll just give you guys an opportunity to ask you questions around that if you have any. Like I say, I've worked with all of you, so some of the stuff might not be new to you. But if there's any questions that you'd like to ask about that, fire away.
So talking about I've got 12 time. So
yep.
would you recommend not to do canter work in that, even if you're sort of doing a travelling walk or something similar rather than a circuit? Because I find I get myself in a real almost tangle if I'm using a 22 foot. Or is that more to do with my skills with rope? I think
yeah, probably a little bit of that, Debbie, but also getting your horse, just increasing the bubble of communication, so we're getting the horse further away from it. Often they'll stick in closer, they'll want to be in closer. So it's just the skill to get them further away from you so that you're not, haven't got all this lying around your feet and what have you. So often the training stick can come into use then. So we can use our training stick just to encourage the horse to move out further away from us. What you might find is that he'll keep coming in towards you, which if I remember correctly, he tends to do, doesn't he?
Yeah, Ainsley does do that,
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. So, we haven't gone to the 22 foot yet with Joan, but that'll be our next step. Good. Okay, no more questions around that? Okay, so another question that I have here is, why does my horse pull when I'm leading? So, I mean, that's I'm not exactly sure, but one of the things that I'm finding a lot of is that when people are leading their horses wherever, to the paddock or to the stable, is that we're holding on to the halter right at the end of the rope instead of letting some rope out and giving the horse some space. And often the horse will, if he's pushing forward in front of you, you'll pull the horse on top of us. So we think the horse is pushing us around, but because we haven't given some slack in our rope, we often find that the horse shoots forward, we'll pull them in, and the horse will start to push on the shoulder, and over time that becomes a real problem. I think we had Debbie, you had Sarah Osborne had that at your yard with the grooms leading you.
Yeah,
so,
too tight.
Yeah, too tight, and what it does is over-sensitizes them, so they become numb to the pressure on the halter, and that can cause a lot of problems too. So just letting loose on your rope when you're leading, and obviously there's a period of time to adjust to that between holding on real tight, but I often see people doing that, and it puts a bit too much pressure on the halter. The other question was, why do I use a rope halter? The main reason I think that I use a rope halter is that I can adjust it to fit properly, because I often see the flat type halters, often they're too big, and one of the dangers of having a halter that's too big, it slides down the nose, and if it goes down too far down the nose, there's those two really thin bones at the end of the skull, and if the horse gets in trouble or stands on the rope or gets pulled, you've got to be real careful because you can break those two little bones in the end of the nose. So the position of the halter is critical. Around the nose band area, I just let the halter sit just below the cheekbone, those two little lumps on either side of the cheekbone. I'll sit at about an inch under that, but no lower than that. And using the correct knot to tie is also important. You can use any knot, but there's a specific way I like to do the knot, and I'll busy developing some videos so I can share that information online too. Because often I'll show people, I think Debbie, we did the same thing. I showed you the knot, and we quickly forget about how to do it. But it's really important that we tie it properly, because if it does slip or come loose and slips down the nose and something happens, you can damage the horse quite severely. And the other thing is the type of knot that I use is easier to undo. If you certain types of knots that you do, if they pull really tight, it's really hard to undo them. But the type of knot that I use, it's a lot easier to release the knot. We've covered that. I think I've covered that with most of you. Any questions around that? No questions. So the other thing is making sure that your halter, when it goes over the pole, that it's sitting about an inch behind the ear. It's not sitting too far back or too far forward. So just nicely sitting just behind the pole, behind the ear, so we don't cause any damage there either. Okay.
That's really interesting, Wayne, because I didn't realise it was had to be so precise. So I'll just be looking at that next time I put it on.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, no, it's really important. A lot of people don't actually think about it. I often see people walking around yards with really loose-fitting halters. And for example, if if the horse got away or you dropped your rope and the horse stood on the rope and put its head up, it caused severe damage to the nose. So that's probably the main reason why I use a rope halter. It's not really about the thickness of the halter, or you can use a flat halter too. There's nothing wrong with doing that as long as it fits correctly. But the problem with the flat halter is there's often no adjustment. I see there are some halters that have adjustments on them, but mostly they don't have much adjustment around the nose or around the pole to make it fit nicely. So that's the main reason why I use a rope halter. Any other questions around the halter? No? Okay. So we'll just move on. I'm sort of hopping between different things here because my titles are halter, training ropes, fitness spiders, and training aids. So training carrot stick and the flag, which most of you know I use both. So we'll just touch on the training aids, using a training aid. Consistency is the key when using a training aid, and also being able to let go or release when the horse is giving you the right cues. Is to be able to let go or release the pressure on that. I see a couple of people I worked with today had a real difficulty in holding their position once they get what they ask for. So once you get your walk or your trot or your canter, making sure that you're consistently holding the training stick in the right position. Often people make the mistake of pointing the training aid at the horse. I always use my training aid parallel to the horse. If I want to move the shoulder, I can move my stick in towards the shoulder, but generally it's set on a parallel to the horse going around me or in a straight line. But the consistency, and I saw that quite a bit today, the consistency of that. And often I say to people, we need to work on the consistency, and because when you're moving your hand a lot, and the horse can see the minutest difference in your body language, or if you're holding a carrot stick, for example, they can see that if that changes, that consistency changes, that can affect the behavior or what the aid that you're asking for. So being really consistent on how you hold your equipment, how you hold your hands. Often I see people trying to get the horse to go forward, and the lead hand, they'll be wiggling the rope, and that can often confuse the horse. So being consistently in the right position and sending your horse around you is really, really important. And also not trying to chase the horse around. So quite often we'll be walking a lot to get the horse to move forward, rather than using our training aid to get the horse to up its tempo, so to speak. So That's the training stick with the rope tail on the end of it. So there's a lot more to that, but consistency is always the key, keeping yourself in the right position. And we did this today with Joan, didn't we? We took a video. Often I take videos and then I send them back to people, and then they can have a look at themselves and see where the inconsistencies are. So if you can get someone to do that for you while you're training, and that's part of the online training course that we'll do, is looking at that consistency on how you hold your hand with your rope in it, how you hold your training aid or your rope, and the consistency of all of that. I had a horse today that's struggling with doing this work mainly because of lunging. Because what quite often happens is that we're moving our feet a lot when we're lunging, and we end up chasing the horse. So just by standing still and using our training aid, we can get the horse to consistently pick up a cue. For example, if we're walking around, my carrot stick, for example, might be just off the ground for a walk, then a foot up for a trot, and then maybe another foot up for a canter. So that consistency is critical to the horse, because he can see the minutest detail. So that's critical. Any questions on that?
So much more about training the owner rather than training the horse, isn't it, Wayne?
Yes.
I totally agree. I thought I was asking one thing, but I was asking something different. She gave me the right answer.
Yeah.
How interesting. And that was watching the video back, so that was really invaluable, Wayne. Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure, Joe.
What I was doing, I'm like, that's why she did that.
Yeah. And often we don't see these things, and when you're in the moment and you're moving and you're trying to get into that place of consistency with whatever you're doing, we're not monitoring ourselves. And like you said, Jonas and Debbie, it's about training ourselves. So I think if you can get someone to video you while you're doing these things, and then you can look for that either consistency or maybe inconsistency with what you're doing, and then alter and adjust accordingly.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Good. And you can send them to me too if you like. Okay, so I've got another question here. Can I use a lunge whip instead of the carrot stick? I don't think there's anything wrong with using a lunge whip. I just find them sometimes a little too long, and sometimes can upset the horse because they're a little too long. So I'd rather have my carrot stick is 1.2 meters long, and then I have the tail on the end, so that doubles the length of it, so that almost equals a lunge whip. So I just find that sometimes using the lunge whip can be too much for the horse, and also if you want to move the shoulder away, if the horse is too close to you, you can't actually get the stick in between you and the horse to move the shoulder away. So personally, I'm not a great fan of lunging whips, but that's a preference, I guess. Okay. Another thing that someone has said to me the other day was about using a stick with a plastic bag on the end. Now, I've seen this on the internet, and I've actually seen someone do this before. So it can be really detrimental, and you've got to be really careful with this type of thing. So I'd rather use my retractable flag for desensitizing, and then two for communication, and also focus. Often I use the retractable flag for focus, mainly for focus, and then also for a bit of desensitizing too. So also I prefer to use a retractable flag because I don't want to overdo these things with the horse. I don't want him to be afraid of it. I like him to respect it but not be afraid of it. So I use a retractable flag so I can emphasize what I'm asking for, and then I can always put it away and go back to a more subtle approach to the cue that I'm asking for. So that covers that question. Any other questions from you guys? No questions?
My flag keeps falling off the end of my stick.
Oh, is that the one you got from me?
Yeah, I'll have to try it on. I think
Yeah.
Because it's literally a flagpole, isn't it? But,
literally, yeah.
do you attach it at 2 points or 1 point, Wayne?
I use both points.
Oh, that's probably what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, and it makes it a little stronger.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good. Okay. What else we got here? I think we've got time for one more question. But what have we got here? Training rope. Okay, so the other one was, can I use my training rope and halter to move my horse, to and from the paddock, or do I use my normal halter going to and from the paddock? And I think it all depends on the amount of training your horses at, and if you're facing difficulties, like Sarah Osborne on DB Green's yard was having a lot of problems with the horse bolting away and pulling away. So when you've got that short line on your halter, it's normally about 1 meter to 1.2 meters. If the horse does react, he'll get away from you really quick, and you've got no chance of correcting that behavior. So often they'll learn to bolt and run away because you're on a really short lead, and sometimes it's through lack of knowledge or understanding what's going on. So looking at that first. But so if you're struggling with that sort of thing, then I recommend using your halter, your rope halter and your training rope, just so you can correct behavior. But once your horse is trained and happy with that, then there's nothing wrong with using a traditional halter and a shorter rope. The other thing, I'll just cover one more thing. Someone asked me the other day why they'll put a knot on the end of the rope. And I'll only put a knot on the end of the rope if my horse is, when I'm asking it to do the different transitions in a circle or a straight line, as if the horse is sort of pulling away from me. One, I can feel the end of the rope. Two, if the horse does take off or excess pressure on it, at least I've got something and I can hang on to my horse. So, for example, if I was walking down the road and doing some training out on the road, I'd always put a knot in the end of my training rope so I can feel the end and it doesn't get pulled through my hand. So I've got some sort of chance to bring the horse back in. Otherwise, if it pulls through and you're gone, also I recommend wearing gloves if you're doing that sort of training. But yeah. So we'll just go one more thing with the halter. I find with the rope halters that teaching the horse to release to pressure, I find it works way better with a rope halter than it does with a traditional halter. So that's another reason why I use it, that pressure release and relaxation, which all of you have done with me. So that's another reason. Just getting the nose to drop down and release. Okay, guys, how's that?
That's really good, Wayne. I was going to ask you about the knot on the end of the rope, just in case of, to stop them going, Cause,
So especially if you're out training and you want to, you're doing road training or you're out of the yard, really, really handy tip, just to put that knot on the end of the rope. The last thing you want to do is pulling through your hands and walk down the road,
I thought it was interesting what you were saying earlier about the bitless bridle too, because if any of us really think that we're going to stop half a ton of horse that wants to get away because it's got a thing in its mouth, that's not going to happen, is it?
No.
If the horse wants to go, it's going to go, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to go, absolutely. It doesn't matter what you're doing now. So it all, obviously it all comes down to training and desensitizing and all that thing. But the thing that about bits that mostly gets me is that once there's a bit in the mouth, the horse really struggles to balance out its respiratory system. So excessive opening of the mouth, it puts the respiratory system into an imbalance. And also sometimes there's a certain amount of fluids that's taken into the air when the horse comes in. That comes from the mouth too. So excess mouth movement, open and closing, or shutting it down, can have a detrimental effect on the amount of fluid that comes through for the air in the system, in the respiratory system, just to lubricate the air. It's an interesting subject.
But it is, and then people overcompensate by using like sweet iron just to make them salivate, don't they? I guess.
Yeah. I've seen quite in certain instances, seen horses that are really bad, get really bad coughs, especially dressage horses. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Something I've noticed in the yard once that I walked into the yard and I saw a lot of the horses were coughing, and I think it's through using excessive bits, because sometimes they double bit them. They'll put a pelham and a snaffle in their mouth with a curb chain and then tie the mouth down. I'm not saying everybody does that, but I have seen it, and I noticed recently that there was a lot of horses coughing in this particular yard, and I don't think it was caused by because it was really clean and it wasn't dusty or anything like that. But I have a concern that it may be due to that sort of thing. I can't prove that, but it's just my opinion.
Or maybe, sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, as a human nurse, I just find what we just spoke about really fascinating, and thinking about the horse's respiratory system. I'm going to do a bit of reading up on that, because that just sounds, I know they are nose breathers, but I didn't realise that they needed that movement in order to balance things, and that's just so interesting. You're saying about coughing. When I've got Angel in her bridle and her bit, which is, she generally seems comfortable in, but she does have the odd moment when we first start riding, when she does this almighty cough, and I think the cough will go watch up. And then she sort of settles down. And I think, is that because it's not dusty where I am? Is that the bit? Is that, so it's just making me think now.
Because it unbalances the amount of fluid that mixes with the air and the epiglottis, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
So let us know next time to do a bit of research on this and give us a little chat on that.
I'll try. I've got my homework.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Okay, have you all learned a little something today?
Yeah, I found that really interesting.
Definitely. Thank you. It's just really fascinating, and thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Christine? Oh, she's in listen only mode. Okay, just want to sort of say goodbye to Christine. Christine, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
I'm so sorry. It looks like your ability to talk to me wasn't switched on there for a second.
Oh, sorry, you didn't hear anything I said.
Oh.
No, I did up to a point, but then I lost you.
Okay.
Have you got any other questions that we may have missed, Christine?
It's just one thing, with the leading. If I have him on a long rope leading or on a longer leading, he pulls me in any direction. But if I hold him directly on the halter, he'll come with me. So
okay.
it's kind of what you said.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not putting a lot of pressure onto the halter, as long as he's soft on that, then that should be okay. Yeah, as long as he's soft. Not if he's pulling against you.
He wants to get to the grass.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I hear you.
And because he's not on grass, so and he will pull me so massively that I have got no chance at all.
Right. So it'll be good to catch up on you on that one. But often just a wiggle of the rope. So I'll have the rope loose, fairly loose. I've got maybe sort of a 3/4 to a meter between us. And if he goes towards, if he starts to go down towards the grass, one way is just to wiggle on the end of the rope. So just give him a quick wiggle and just keep doing that until he gets the message that he can't go down. Because often we get into a pulling match, don't we?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with half a ton of horse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for that nugget.
Who do we think we are?
Exactly.
Okay, guys, lovely to spend the hour with you, and we'll be going again in 2 weeks' time, and I'll get the topic through to you. But if you've got any questions, I like to have questions because it also challenges me. So when you come back next time, if you've got any questions on this session or the next one, if you're going to join us, I would appreciate it.